Hello, 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 salut, bonjour, and all other hellos in between. Welcome, everyone. Nin Cassandra Ndishnikat Danoki Tage Oo Daji Kang. My name's Cassandra Spade, and I'm woven into the work at Thinking Rock Community Arts as an operations and programming coordinator. I will be emceeing today's Playgo Round event, Digital Infrastructure in Rural and Northern Canadian Communities, brought to you by the lovely Mass Culture and in partnership with Grossmore Music Festival. Today, I am joining you from Bawating to St. Marie. Mio ma aking eyag iu, giche na konegewin gawa windma dengaban miwensha. Robertson Huron Treaty Eshnikadeg, a place where the lands are covered by the Robertson Huron Treaty. Mi oo, me najichigatek, dikenjigatek nongum. Mamawe, widoko dadida, jidajikamang, gimino bimat dizuanan. And in making this acknowledgement in Anishinaabe, I invite each of you to learn more about the languages of the lands where you are from and encourage you to learn a new word today. On behalf of the organizers of today's event, I would like to recognize and respect all recorded and unrecorded nations who have cared for and continue to care for these lands. At Mass Culture, we honor the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and our responsibility to share and care for these lands around the Great Lakes. We are grateful for the opportunity to nurture the world of the arts and connect cultures and communities across this land, which is home to many diverse Indigenous peoples and nations. Today's session offers a convening format that Mass Culture is currently experimenting with called Playgo Round. This method for gathering and sharing knowledge involves a more deepened approach, giving our three speakers different occasions to share information, listen to their colleagues, reflect, and maintain a level of curiosity in the subject matter. We are thrilled to have all of you take part in this knowledge journey, as today we will continue to navigate through this topic by having the speakers interview one another based on their thought pieces. And you can watch these recordings of their thought pieces on Mass Culture's website. After the relay of interviews has taken place, graphic recorder Devin Kerslake will be sharing her artistic interpretation of today's conversation. And now it's my pleasure and delight to introduce you to today's speakers. Holly Cunningham is an arts administrator and musician based in North Bay, Ontario, who is currently the executive director of the Near North Mobile Media Lab. She is a graduate of Sheridan College's Media Arts program and holds a BA in Fine Arts from Nipissing University. Her professional work focuses on bridging gaps in media arts access for artists in Northern Ontario, specifically through her work on the Digital Creator North program. Her board work includes the Independent Media Arts Alliance, IMAA, Film Advisory Committee of Cultural Industries in the North, and currently sits on a chair of the Media Arts Network of Ontario. And with that, we welcome Holly. From the other side, from the Atlantic, joining us is Todd Hennessy, an associate professor in theater at Memorial University of Newfoundland. Todd is also a professional theater director with a strong interest in new play development. A current research project of his is virtual reality and the theater, and we welcome Todd. And our third speaker today is Michael Mooney, who is a certified engineering technologist with 20 years experience in technology and engineering sector, driving collaboration, change, and innovation within highly complex and highly regulated environments. His work has involved change management and deploying highly resilient or governance organizational models to foster collaboration and development performance-driven teams, which are able to realize objectives within startup, rapid change, regulatory, and governance environment across multiple sectors. Michael is currently active as an executive director of Creative Lab North, president-elect of OACETT, and a policy strategy advisor for NGOs, coalitions, and province territorial agencies across Canada, a dedicated advocate for diversity, inclusion, and human rights in both physical and digital realms. Michael focuses on the role technology can play when developed and deployed for social good, in bridging the growing equity gaps and promoting economic development in disadvantaged or remote populations and communities. With that, we welcome Michael and all of the others to the conversation on digital infrastructure in rural and northern Canadian communities. Over the next 45 minutes, our speakers will enter into an interview relay of sorts. But during this time, while you're listening, keep an eye on the chat and feel free to share your insights and respond to our questions for you, the audience. And with that, I'd like to first welcome Michael and Holly to enter our virtual stage.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Holly.
Hello.
Looking forward to interviewing you here on your thought piece that you shared with us, which I thought was fantastic, by the way.
Thank you.
So let's dive right into it. I mean, one of the statements that you made was kind of around how it was difficult for you to stay in kind of the box of kind of mobile projects. And I think we can all kind of agree that when technology kind of gets in the mix, the lines really start to blur and how best we can kind of deliver in programming. So I really wanted to get your thoughts on kind of dive into that more when we talk about kind of the benefit of kind of interconnecting different models versus kind of these discrete solutions that can be offered, and kind of how technology kind of has played a role in that.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking about it. I was watching your thought piece before we jumped in, and I think you had made the comment that we kind of all touched on the idea that, really the solution isn't one or the other, or there isn't really most of the time it isn't something as simple as, okay, well, mobile units are great, or sandboxes are great, or lending libraries are the solution. And it typically is a lot more complicated, and it needs to be tailored to the community. I think it ends up being a little bit of everything. Although I was definitely given the mobile unit sort of topic to talk about, and rightfully so, near North Mobile Media Lab, I've always found it difficult to stay within one sort of project lane. And I know that I touched on this in my thought piece, but there's a lot of limitations to and there's a lot of there's a lot that you lose when you just basically enter into a community, do programming, and then leave. And I think it was touched on by all of us, but the idea of really listening to the community that you're working with and what folks are actually asking you for, and then being open to shifting your idea or shifting your services, or really being responsive to those communities that you're trying to deliver programming to. And that can be difficult, right? Like, it can be difficult when you have been given funding for a particular program, you're, going forward with it, and then the communities are starting to tell you, like, this really isn't actually helpful for us, and we would actually like this now. And being able to be responsive to that, being able to shift what you're doing, that can be really difficult. But I think it's important.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting too, because in your response there, you kind of touched on the idea of kind of connecting with the community, and the need to really reflect what the community wants. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on how do we best kind of adapt our approaches and solutions so that they are kind of people and community centric, instead of these parachute programs that are kind of dropped in.
I think the listening piece is so important, the other thing that I've really realized too is that, like, in-person consultation, so actually being physically present, being with someone, talking to them. Obviously, right now that's really difficult, and that the last couple of years have been really hard to actually engage with communities and have consultation in a really good way. But that checking in and actually being physically present, especially when you're not actually in that community. So, as you know, the Media Lab, we when we were running our Digital Creator North program, or even when we were running our mobile lab residency project, these are artists, and these are communities that are far away from us. So we're really working remotely in those situations, but it was always so essential for us to connect physically with those folks and actually go to them, meet with them, have meals with them. And a great example of where, that's not possible and how you can shift is actually one of our biggest mobile programs from 2019 was like a VR project, actually with Thinking Rock, in partnership with Thinking Rock, funded by MasterCard. And we did multiple, I think like 7 or 8 different VR films that with communities and with youth, with artists that traveled there and mentored them. And those films were supposed to eventually be seen by the public or, by whoever, not necessarily the public, but part of the process was that something would happen with these films. Because we were unable to physically go to the communities and consult with them and say, hey, do you guys like this film? Should it change? Is everybody cool with this? Can this be shown publicly and actually get consent and get everyone's input in person? None of those films have actually been seen yet. And it's one of those situations where we really just have to wait until we can actually go and we can actually sit and talk in person. So sometimes it takes a lot of time to be thoughtful and to do things in a way that is a little bit more thoughtful than just trying to make phone calls and have Zoom meetings.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting. You kind of touched on it again too. Is um, in your thought piece is really the timelines may differ sometimes between how our funding works and how we have to answer for our projects. And so I was wondering if you wanted to kind of dive a little bit more into your thoughts on that, because I think generally the three of us really hit on the fact that sometimes like the funding sources and the outcomes can sometimes their expectations can differ quite a bit from what the community needs and
Mm-hmm.
what we're seeing in terms of response back for the community. So did you want to chat about that a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what's important is I think it's important to challenge the funders sometimes. I think sometimes we're afraid to do that. But the funders need us and they need the engagement, they need the artists and they need the communities, or else they don't really have anything to fund. So I think it's important that we actually challenge them sometimes and are honest about when programs need to change. I think we need to be able to be honest about when something fails and when we've learned something important from that failure. Um, and yeah, I mean, there's never been a better time to, I guess, do that kind of work than now because everybody, well, not everyone, but most of us have had to go back to the funders and say, hey, we really need a plan B. We are not going to be able to do this anymore. And it's been nothing but pivoting and changing and going online and trying to work around the pandemic. Um, so now I think we have maybe gotten a little bit more comfortable with calling up our funding officers and calling up folks who are stakeholders and saying, hey, actually this really isn't going to work. We're going to have to wait, or we're going to have to do something completely different, or we're going to have to pivot. And hopefully something positive that comes out of the pandemic for the relationship between the funders and the organizations or the artists is that maybe they are starting to be more receptive to changes in plans and being able to be more responsive to what's actually needed.
Yeah, you made an interesting point when you were talking about funding as well, is about kind of the focus on professional artists versus kind of the development of youth. And I was wondering if you kind of wanted to it kind of ties to the conversation around finding the right entry point as well for like the programming and that. So I was wondering if you wanted to kind of take the opportunity to kind of expand on that as well.
Sure. So, yeah, I guess at the heart of that struggle, I think, is the funding silos that are particularly relevant in Canada. And in a lot of ways, we have funding for our education system and we have funding for our arts programs through our arts councils. And then there's other pockets of funding for like, health and well-being and jobs and economic development. And sometimes it can be really difficult because um, you know, it, when something isn't working, for instance, in Northern Ontario, the education system, like, not always working. So, although the arts councils are kind of mandated to serve professional artists, folks who are older, particularly adults who are practicing artists, it's not as well equipped to be serving youth or young people who are also emerging artists and who also are in need, especially in remote and northern communities, in need of artistic programming and development. And if the education system is not providing that, then it 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 becomes more important for arts organizations to consider serving those demographics. And I know in my thought piece I was talking about how when when we were looking for emerging mid-career established artists, it was actually really difficult to locate a lot of folks, and it just seemed like there was a bit of a disparity happening in the north. And just when we did our consultation and we went across Northern Ontario and did a bit of an environmental scan, there just seemed to be huge gaps in access for young people, and the idea that young people need to have an entry point into the artistic discipline that they eventually become artists in and become a practicing artist of. If those entry points are not readily available, or if there's no mentors, then it's very difficult for that to actually organically happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I mean, you mentioned in your piece the importance of kind of youth being really not just kind of like school age individuals, but also kind of really focusing on youth in terms of kind of where they're developing their sense of self and identity. So I was wondering if you wanted to kind of share some of the lessons learned about kind of the importance of kind of arts and creation and some of your programming in kind of youth kind of coming up with that self identity.
Mm-hmm. So I think I may have mentioned this in the thought piece, but something that blew me away the most about the Digital Creator North program was some of the unexpected results or serendipitous, breakthroughs that we kind of like weren't really expecting. And I think what was most interesting was that, especially like teenagers and maybe preteens, just having a safe space for them to come and connect and then work through maybe their artistic process, or to be able to share artistic work that they're working on and collaborating with other folks, was so much more than just the skills development, like the hard skills development. It was also about, really just encouraging them to start to express themselves and giving them an outlet in which to like explore identity and maybe connect with people like them. So it kind of got bigger than what we even like imagined it would be for those youth, which can also be a challenge because we're not necessarily equipped to like deal with all of the questions and challenges that come up with youth exploring identity and exploring their self-expression. But I think that we're not the first arts organization that's kind of had to come up against that, becoming more than what you even planned to be as a service delivery.
Yeah, and I think kind of ending on that, it's interesting to kind of get your perspective on. So there's two elements, right? Like there's access to technology when we talk about youth, and then there's also the idea of economic development and what we traditionally accepted as versus kind of investing in youth as part of it. So I was wondering if you can really kind of talk about the need for access and youth to kind of be included in those dialogues around
Mm-hmm.
using the creative industries and technology.
I think the biggest argument is just youth retention, and because the youth are the future of the economy of wherever you are. If you lose your youth, I think your economy is on a bad track. You need to have young folks, innovative folks, artists staying or coming back and living there. And so, yeah, I think just supporting artistic practice, creating community, encouraging youth to stay, that they can actually stay in their community and be a practicing artist or work in technology, is in and of itself the biggest argument for the economic development piece.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It was great chatting and diving a little deeper into your thought piece. So
Thank
I
you.
look forward to the next round.
Me too.
So exciting to hear about this, particularly because I am a Northern Indigenous person. I grew up in a Northern community and I am a youth. And some of the pieces you touch on is the importance of time and creating time so you can build relationships, because there's tons of infrastructure and relationships in the North. And how do we start to weave in those digital and technological elements to support that? So thank you so much. And now I would like to invite Todd to join Holly on our virtual stage.
Hi, Todd.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good, good. I'd be
Good.
lying if I said I wasn't a little bit nervous, but great.
Awesome. So I've got some questions for you. I'm very excited. Um, yeah, I loved your thought piece. I'm just gonna jump in, if that
Thanks. Yeah.
makes sense. So I really loved when you spoke about failure and failure being important. I think your words were failure is really, really good, which I loved. Um, and I guess my question is, what have your failures in working in this way that with the sandbox model, what have your failures taught you, and then how do they inform your work moving forward? If you just want to touch on that.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think if once you kind of get in this work, people talk about failure all the time and how important it is to fail, but we're also really afraid of it. None of us wants to fail because we're kind of seen as being failures. But the learning happens when you screw it up or when you make mistakes. And the thing I like about the sandbox approach, which, if I'm being honest, I'm not sure I even know what that quite means yet, but I think part of it is having a safe space in which you can fail, when you can fall flat on your face, and it doesn't have any real bearing on the world. You've made a mistake, and then you kind of roll things back and you kind of try it again. And I think that's where the learning happens, and for me, that's where the creation happens. I mean, unless you're really making a muck of it, and I can describe all manner of failures for you if you like, but what it boils down to is me trying to figure out how to use these tools, me trying to figure out what these things mean, messing up pretty horribly, going and talking to people, trying to work through a solution, figuring out a workflow, figuring out how to make things work. Essentially comes down to relationships and building partnerships and finding people you trust. And this may lead into an access question, but it really comes down to having the feeling secure enough to be able to mess it up and for there to be no real real world consequences. I think that's the lovely thing about if we can talk about a sandbox, I think that's kind of what it means. You can mess around the dirt all day, and it's okay. And providing those kinds of supports and making sure people feel comfortable and make sure that people are, we all trust each other enough to go, it doesn't matter, like, mess it up, it's okay. We'll just erase it, or we'll figure out how to roll it back, and we'll try it again. And what I love in all of that, and with the people I'm currently working with, is that kind of sense of togetherness, that we're all screwing it up together, which means we'll all learn together, and we'll share information, we'll figure out how to do stuff, and we'll just pass that around, and you build this incredibly trustful kind of network of people who can go, I really shagged that up. How can I get out? How do I get out of this? And so we can all call each other or figure it out and work on things together. So that's kind of the beautiful part of this, and it doesn't need to be in a digital way either. I mean, I'm in the last couple of years working very practically on projects as well. I'm trying to figure out all kinds of tools, and you don't want to hurt yourself, but failing is a real big, for me, is a really important part of the process. And again, we say this all the time, but I don't know that we really have the confidence to let it all fall apart. And so many of us, and myself included, I mean, if I'm contracted to work on a play, for example, if I'm directing a production, I can't really mess that up. I mean, we have to open the show at a certain date and things have to work. So it's finding those environments in which you can say it doesn't matter. Let's let it all fall apart, and then we'll figure out how we went wrong, why we went wrong, and how we can kind of move on from there. We've already spoken a little bit of innovation, and that's, I think, a key part of that as well. And again, the rhetoric is there. We talk about it all the time, but I don't know that people really believe it. And I just want to say, believe it. Messing up is totally fine.
Awesome. I'm going to back up a bit, and I'm going to actually ask you to, because you did mention that you don't really know yet what a sandbox is, which I love. And so maybe just try to explain kind of what your experience has been with creating a sandbox, and what at this point you would define that as a sandbox model.
So the last few years, I've been heavily involved with a few groups who are working to create a variety of labs, working spaces, digital spaces for people to be able to create in, innovation centers, maker spaces, centers where people can have access to tools that they can create, again, all manner of things. That runs from the very analog. We just bought a digital CNC loom, for example, which is a cool piece of equipment, straight into the digital. And what we're trying to do, I think, again, this group of us, is provide a space where anyone can come in, they can use these tools, they can create, invent, whatever happens to be prototype products, whatever that looks like. But all that assumes you know how to use those tools. And all that assumes that you have a base, sort of line to come in and say, oh yeah, I can be a digital creator. And the barrier to entry is so steep. And that's a learning thing as much as it's an economic thing. It's about, having access to tools that you may never have seen before. And we give you the keys to go use them. Like, that's not enough. We need to be able to educate people, train people, talk to people, provide support, I guess what I'm trying to say. So the idea of a sandbox, I love it, in which we invite all people to, to do all sorts of things. But if you don't know how to work a saw, if you don't know how to solder, if you don't know how to work in Procreate or any of these other digital tools, then it doesn't mean anything. So how do we can we make sure that the project you want to do and the thing you want to have access to makes sense for you? How do we just provide those base level supports for people? And this is not an insignificant question. We just put, for us in this part of the region, a lot of money into building out an innovation center, which I'm really excited about. We've given no thought to training people. We've given no thought to who we invite in. And yes, the intergenerational thing is hugely important. So much local knowledge, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little while. But we have to be sure we're thinking about that as well. And oftentimes, we build these beautiful spaces, and we build this huge, this lovely structure, and we've got the shell filled with all manner of cool stuff. And we've not really thought about how we're going to make sure people can use it to its fullest. So yes, sandbox, but filled with all sorts of stuff that may be foreign to a lot of people. So it's a really tough thing to figure out how to make sure that we're really providing access.
Thank you. So another question that I have that actually I'm quite interested in myself, working through Digital Creator in Northern Ontario. You mentioned that the university academic setting can be pretty uninviting for a lot of folks, and that you've had to do a lot of work in creating that welcoming space and really encouraging participation from community and making sure they know it's a space for them. And what if maybe just expand on some of the challenges there, and maybe just some of the ways that you've tried to make that space sort of welcoming and removing barriers.
Well, I hope we have. I don't think that challenge has really been solved yet. But so again, just to back up a little bit, Memorial University, which is where I work, is Newfoundland's only university. We're the only university in the province, and all of us who work at the university will say Memorial is quite proud of the fact that it's public obligations to the people of the province. Talk about that, but it really means we're here for the community. Nevertheless, certainly where I live, which is in the west coast of Newfoundland, there's this distinct, almost hardwired distinction between what we call town and gown, right? It doesn't help that the campus where I work was literally built on a hill, because it could be more ivory towers. It's away from the community, it's up on this hill. It's hard, it's even hard to get to. And then it's just this opaque building that's, signage is, I don't mean to offend my colleagues, but signage is poor. It's not a very welcoming thing, and it's hard to get your head around if you want to come on campus. But we're here for the people of the community, and what I want to say to everybody is, come in and let us help you do the things you want to do. Let us provide spaces for you to work in. Let us give you access to stuff, tools you might want. I mean, I a couple of years ago was involved in fitting a fab shop in the School of Fine Arts, which is where I work. Cool suite of digital tools that can't just be for me, can't just be for us. It has to be for the community. So not me, but a group of us spent a lot of time talking to the community, going out, just meeting people, a lot of coffee, a few beers, and say, what do you need, and how can we make it happen? How can we bring you up there, get you in there, and have you working? So we started DIY nights and community groups, and just tried in every way we could think of to say, no, this is not restricted. Please come in, please use these tools, and help us spin that web even further. If we have, folks in the community who are deeply involved in the DIY community, just as one example, they become ambassadors, they talk it up, they bring in more people, we host events, we do all we can do to break those barriers down and impress upon people that these barriers are a little bit artificial. And we just, as you just said, we have to fight with people to say, nope, we're not going to block these doors, we're not going to block people out. If you want in, you come in. And if we can help you do your project, we will help you do your project. And that's been really, really cool stuff. For me, it's been really, really cool. So we've had entrepreneurs working on new products. We've had coders, we've had DIY folks, we've had people who want to learn how to use equipment. We've had people who just want to play with tools. I mean, it's exciting. And when you have, and this innovation center I'm involved with, and one of the founding principles of that is this idea of convergence and collision, right? I mean, the more people from as broad a range of the population as possible in there is super exciting, because those ideas just generate, what I want is this garden where these ideas can grow and people can just say, hey, this is cool, let's do this, hey, let's go, let's do that. And suddenly you've got this incredibly exciting environment where stuff is being generated, from highly creative artistic works to very practical, I need a door stopper or whatever. But it's really important to me that we continue to break down whatever barriers to access happen to exist.
So I know I had touched upon in the last round the idea of like unexpected breakthroughs or unexpected results. I think one of the terms I found was serendipitous findings in research or in when you're attempting a project. And I'm interested in hearing about some of your own encounters with unexpected breakthroughs, maybe some happy mistakes, or I'm sure that in a sandbox environment that probably happens a lot.
Yeah. No, and again, one of the things that we have been talking quite a lot about is this idea of convergence, right? And this idea of collisions, this idea that if you put a disparate bunch of people in the room, those ideas will just bang off one another and all kinds of cool things happen. So a couple of years ago, I've been really struggling. I'm selfish in this regard because I'm trying to do some XR work and some VR work. And this part of the world, that's hard. There aren't a lot of coders here. There aren't people working in that field. It's just very difficult to kind of put some of these projects together. So a bunch of years ago, there's a couple of pre-pandemic, 3 years ago now, I guess, I was lucky enough to get some grant money from an organization. Anyway, I hired a student to come and help me try and do some projection mapping work. And the student, who was a local high school student, came, and we spent 6 weeks, I think, just in a shop, working on stuff. And it was an amazing experience because, we were both figuring these tools out. We both had these ideas, we both had completely different backgrounds. But the ideas that came out of all that meant that we suddenly found ourselves in the studio discovering, all kinds of really cool things, or again, around projection mapping and sort of crazy idea that I had. And she got really excited about all that, and we started banging ideas off one another. And suddenly we were making stuff, and we were shoulders deep in this crazy software none of us had ever used before, figuring things out. And suddenly we generated these incredibly cool images and pictures and videos that were just exciting to both of us. And we just learned an awful lot, discovered an awful lot, and that was really cool. And likewise in the makerspace, which we just fitted out here about a year ago, there's some folks from the community coming and do some coding work, which is not a thing that I haven't done any coding since an old Atari machine 40 years ago. But it was, again, we just discovered stuff, and the ideas that end up kind of circulating meant a bunch of other projects kind of happened. And it's super exciting when that happens.
Cool. So I think we have time for one more very quick question. I'm interested in the idea of innovation. You talked about how innovation is attractive to stakeholders and funders, but it's harder to sell something that's brand new. And I'm also just interested, I guess, just to quickly expand on that. Why do you think it's harder for them to fund something that is new?
Money. I think in part it comes down to measurables, and I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing, I think it's one of the reasons why we talk about whether you can teach creativity. I mean, it's just so hard to measure it. And without a discrete outcome, I think sometimes the funders get a bit jittery. And I'm not going to dispute that. I mean, I'm sure it's all fine and fair enough. But what I worry about when I'm thinking about these things is the spirit of pure creation or pure invention, where, like you say, these ideas collide, something new happens, and it's original and it's great. And it can be hard to sell that because the immediate question is who's going to buy it, or how much money is it going to make in 3 years' time? And you're thinking, I don't really care about that. This is a really cool idea to help people out. Let's do this thing. But if you get, sometimes from the funding perspective, it's money in, money out, and how can we measure it? And so I think in this part of the world, at least, and I don't mean to overstate this in any kind of way, but innovation sometimes gets mired down into what we're already doing, because you can easily measure it. A year from now, you can judge success by how much you've improved output or improved efficiencies or whatever. And maybe that's not the most important thing. Maybe the most or a different thing, a more exciting thing is, let's think about something totally new. I worry in this province sometimes too that we're stuck in this cycle of we're in deep trouble here economically, and it's going to take more than just figuring out how to revise older systems. We need to think about some new stuff, and which is why I think, and not to overstate it, there's lots of issues here, but if you find the right bunch of creative, inventive, artistic engineers, as Michael's described it, to help us get out of some of these problems, that's what I think were the exciting parts.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the excitement is for me, anyway.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was
You're
great
welcome.
to be able to interview you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. There are a couple of exciting pieces in there, like that the digital technology in the sandbox is really useless unless there are people there to show you how to use it and to work with you. And so it's people-centered or community-centered. And another great metaphor or illustration that comes out of it is play, and that people need to play in their communities, and digital development is just an extension of playing and making communities livable. So excellent. I have a lot of different ideas percolating, and thank you so much, Holly. And with this, I'd like to now invite Michael back to join Todd on our virtual stage.
Hi, Michael.
Hey, Todd. I'm a little nervous now. I don't know if I have anything to add to the great conversation and pieces from you and Holly. I think you guys have done a great job covering it. So.
Well, thanks very much. I will just say, and this is not idle flattery on my part, your thought piece, I found it exciting and invigorating and inspiring in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things that you articulated really, really very well is the complexity of this issue, and this big ball of yarn of sort of issues and things to think about. And so complex, I think it's hard to know even what strand to kind of pull on to begin to sort through it all. So I have maybe a broad kind of leading question that I'm hoping I can lead something a bit more finely tuned. But you talk a lot in your topics about access, and that's something that's on my mind an awful lot, as you just heard. I mean, I think access is key in this, and that's covers a lot of ground. I think access means an awful lot in a variety of ways. But the first thing is, I wonder if you can talk about what that means to you, what access truly means, what it looks like, how to get there. Again, I know it's broad, but I will drill down a little bit. And the other point you made, I think related to this is one of participation. You just heard me talk about it a little bit, but I would love to hear your thoughts about what participation genuinely, honestly looks like. And then finally, we'll get into your notions of creation versus consumption, and I think there's a thread through all of that. But anyway, those are things I'd love to talk to you about.
No, that would be amazing. So, I mean, I think on the access piece, there's a number of ways to really look at it, but I think like fundamentally in the broad stroke is if we're serious about creating kind of, I don't want to call it universal access, but if we're equitable access for creatives, artists to be able to create and do the things that they want to do, we need to set the measures that those that want it have access to it. And whether that is a digital pipeline for the internet, or whether that is the support services that you talked about being surrounded by, so that you can learn the skills that you need to do, is that's what I mean when I'm talking about access in kind of the broadest sense. Now, in the Yukon, we have some very specific access issues around that relate to geography and access to technology and that as well. But I think really in terms of the dialogues we really need to start having is the benchmarks that we choose to measure when we talk about equitable access and building up community, the artistic or creative industries and that in these areas and access to technology is that if somebody wants to take advantage of it, whether it's a sandbox or whether it's a mobile unit or a lending library, it needs to be available, and it needs to be available in a way that actually meets the need of the community that's seeking access, and then the people that are in the community as well. So it's not just a matter of the community having access, but it's building around the individuals in that community for what they need as well. We have many communities here in the Yukon that are separated by a fair amount of distances, and they all have shared needs, but they also all have very specific access needs as well. And the common thread that we have up here is this idea of the creative and industries and cultural industries being the catalyst for this discussion and around access. I think very specifically in terms of the digital age is that internet connectivity, we need to rethink how we provide access to the internet and how we think of it as just, we need to rethink the whole thing, like how we provide it, and the access is really not meeting the needs of our rural and northern communities. So
yeah, and not surprising, I think, I'm sure for the three of us, very similar concerns in this part of the world as well. I mean, access is key, and we make assumptions of who has access. On the equity issue, again, I wonder if you just talk a bit more about what that means for you as well. I mean, I think again, on the face of it spans a pretty wide gamut of issues here, but what does equity look like for you?
well, I think again it goes back to being honest about what we're talking about. So we often talk about equity, and really what we're talking about is equal, and equal doesn't necessarily correlate to equitable, and there's a few reasons for it. So we can say, as an example, internet is available to everybody that wants it, right? But it's not equitable because in some areas there's huge cost barriers and other social economic issues that prevent access from being equitable. And that's the same for just about anything that we can think of when we talk about equal versus equity not always being the same thing. And I find that too often we're quick to rush to the justification of something being equal, i.e. it's there, versus actually having the tougher conversation about whether or not it's actually equitable, and that everybody that wants to have access to it has access to it, that we're providing the right support to help people take advantage of something, which goes back to the sandbox as well. Is just because we have a sandbox or a lending library or anything in a particular place, if we're not providing the support services that train people how to use them, then the only people that get to use them are those that have the means to do it themselves, or have, through some form of other access, been granted the ability to learn the skills needed. And so when I talk about equity, I'm really talking about changing the way we think about things so that it's a matter of choice as to whether or not somebody has access to something, and breaking down those physical, digital, or socioeconomic barriers that really are standing in the way. And this touches on Holly's point too, is it's when we start getting into the communities and we start really talking about what they need, it becomes really hard to kind of keep everything in kind of this discrete, nice little package, and it gets very muddy, and it becomes difficult for us to understand where we can focus and where we can help. And I think that's where the dialogue that Holly was talking about, and even yourself, is being present with the community and hearing what they need and not having any preconceptions about what the solution is going to be. So for me, equity in kind of the broad strokes really talks about is that people that can make the choice to participate or to not, and it's not a decision that's made for them. So as an example, in the North, the artists that want to participate and make a living in creative industries often have to choose to leave our northern communities to be able to do that. And everybody says that's a choice, but when we really look at the socioeconomic issues that are around that, it's not really a choice, because their other option isn't a valid choice we would put on anybody else anywhere else in the country. So why the expectation is that that's a fair and equitable choice here really resonates with me in terms of how do we really start kind of solving some of these solutions. It's also a loss for our communities because we have a tremendous amount of creativity and stories and a wealth of kind of culture here in the Yukon that we often lose to other areas of the country and to the south because of what we call choices that aren't really choices if you want to participate in kind of creative industries. So.
Yeah, that's a fairly profound thought for me. I have to say, that issue that folks feel driven out if they want to participate is really not fair, and that we should be working to make sure that people, as you say, I think you said brilliantly, if this is your choice, if you choose to do it, if you want it, you should be able to have access, you should be able to get in, and not feel forced away by an artificial choice. I think it's a really profound thought for me. The other thing, I think part and parcel of this conversation, and I think it struck a real note with me in your thought piece, is the idea of decentralization and about dispersing these things, probably geographically, but also in terms of socioeconomic barriers, making sure that people are able to participate. But again, I'd love to hear you talk a bit more about what decentralization kind of looks like, and what a model of that might be.
Yeah, so I mean, when we think about kind of when we look pre kind of digital age, as we talk about kind of providing resources, as we would centralize them. We wouldn't necessarily use the word hub kind of before it kind of entered the technical language, but we would centralize our resources around areas that had critical mass resources, whether financial or people, that could provide the services. And you would have to travel to there to gain access to it. So not to knock universities or colleges, but there are examples of kind of creating these centralized hubs where you have to go to gain access to the information to do it. When digital technology enters into the conversation, we really see the ability to basically decentralize the sources and access points to that information or that education or those resources. But what the barriers we kind of run into is that we still very much in the way we fund things and do other things, do it kind of around a critical mass and centralized kind of model, despite the fact that we see globally technology decentralizing, even like your traditional knowledge sources like universities and colleges. And so I think the important conversation and models to have is really looking at hubs as what they were always intended to be, right? And that is they're places where you're kind of connected, right? And then you're interconnected with other hubs that are kind of distributed across the country or the globe. And technology makes that possible, provided we're providing the infrastructure to actually support that interconnectivity and that collaboration between places. It goes back to your idea of if you put people together just with no predetermined outcome, but just to do cool stuff and experiment, you come up with these really amazing things. And it doesn't matter whether it's an artist or an engineer or whether it's a land use plan. Like the idea of creating these centers where community has needs and the hub addresses those needs, but then is also interconnected into other communities with what they're trying to do, and they can support each other and play and communicate and collaborate. I think that really is the model we need to go start looking at. And I think from a larger standpoint, that's why I feel so strongly about there not being one solution, right? Like it's a toolbox we need to develop for solutions. So whether it's a sandbox or whether it's a lending library or whether it's a mobile unit, it's really picking the right tool that's right for the community and location that you're in and that can address the needs. And then you're creating that interconnectivity that allows the community to be successful in the long run. And what I mean by that is the model then is stewarded. So the community has ownership over it, they've provided, but then they're also connected in to make sure that it's long lived. And it's not just these discrete, like we said, parachute in and then move, and then there's nothing left to support the community. And so while we, Creative Labs North is very focused on kind of the creative industries and that, again, we're seeing this as a catalyst to be able to develop some of these models in a community context that can help us span the geographical distance, but also help us address some of those socioeconomic barriers that we're seeing in our smaller communities. Because I think I mentioned it is we talk about the Yukon as being 40,000 people for the territory, approximately. And so that in itself presents a unique challenge when we have small towns in places, even in Northern Ontario, that have larger population bases, more centralized than we have in the north. So that's why I think that's the uniqueness that these models can provide when we think about them as hubs and interconnected, and we think about decentralization. I also think there's a focus on major urban centers, on being the creative centers for it. And really, what we see is we see them really sucking in all of the creativity and artists and that we have in all of kind of our rural and remote communities. And so we're losing that to those big centers. And I think decentralization allows us to keep that talent but still participate in the larger creative industries.
Yeah, when you begin almost to think about like a mesh network where you've got communities that are dispersed but still able to talk about another, work together, solve problems together, it's a very exciting sort of thing. And I think you say putting that I won't say power, but that ability to be able to solve problems collectively, even at a distance, is incredibly pretty powerful thought, right?
Yeah.
Years ago, sorry, I won't want to distract you. But years ago, I used to lecture or present at various volunteer conferences and talk about the power of technology to do this. But again, you run straight away. What I used to get were very practical questions. How do I get a computer? How do I get on the internet? Folks want to know how to solve those kinds of problems before they get into this sort of bigger picture stuff. But what I'm amazed by is that 30 years later, barrier is still such an issue, and providing access is still such an issue.
Well, yeah, we have a lot of so we have pre-existing barriers and systemic barriers that we need to acknowledge, right? And it's a different set of skills and tools we also need to develop and teach to address those systemic barriers, right? So we can't take a purely technical problem solving approach to a non-technical problem. We need social problem solving skills, and we need forums and methods to come together to actually focus on making systems level changes as well as kind of those individual level changes, really to have meaningful change. And we really need to start focusing on people. We need even the funding question that we talked about, right, is it comes back to is people are where we need to invest in to make all of this work. And if we only invest in the technology, and we don't deal with the systemic issues that we have, we're never going to solve the problems that haunt us, basically.
That might be time. Thank you, Michael, so much. Really fascinating stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So such a thought-provoking conversation between the two of you around equity and specifically agency, and being able to say what you need and what you don't need. Because we could invest or spend a lot of money to develop one system, and there are going to be multiple problems that emerge. So allowing and supporting the agency of collectives, communities, and individuals just allows digital infrastructure to grow. And I love that idea. And it could be any solution that we've talked about today, just depending on what the person and community needs. So thank you so much. So a big thank you to Holly, Todd, and Michael for this insightful relay of conversations. There were also some reflections and questions that surfaced from the chat that I want to read out and share with you. So first, a question for all the speakers, as there's been a chat from the audience about funding. So the question reads, if you could dream up a fund to better support artists working in the digital realm and to provide greater focus on supporting artists in rural and northern communities, what are some of the aspects that you would include?
I can answer if you don't mind. So I feel like it would be just like a living fund. Like people could just experiment and do their work and just and be able to just live. It would not be for innovation, because I think that the cycle of innovation, there's a dark side to that, and it's not sustainable. So the dream fund would be maybe this is after innovation, once you have innovated, what happens then? I think the question has to be asked, how do we sustain artists, and how do we sustain organizations, and then sustain the communities once the innovation has occurred? Because I think that piece is always missing from the funding conversation, and it's just not sustainable to always be innovating, right? And then trying to switch to basically, unless you adopt a corporate model and you are charging people for your services, or you are having private sector investment, it's just not sustainable. So that would be That would be the aspect of the dream fund.
I think I would add that I think in the comment along the lines of like forcing almost organizationally into kind of these corporate models, whether they're not for profits or otherwise. I would add is that I think funds that really support the idea of social enterprise and the ability for individuals to make a decision to do something for the good of the community versus, as Todd kind of hinted, financial measurements in and financial measurements out. And I think also moving funding away from stuff and focusing it on people. And I often have arguments it's about, well, we'll fund all this technology, but then like nobody knows how to use it. So what, like we're going to have a room full of tech that nobody can use, and you won't fund the people to build those skills, right? So I think those are kind of key things that I think funders need to start building into their funding models.
Yeah, and I have very little to add to all that. I'm right now enrolled in a very sounds apropos of something involved right now, which is the funders really want to fund all this gear and not people, and trying to convince them that we should be thinking about the people is really difficult, and we somehow need to get over that. And I understand the value of equipment and gear and all that sort of stuff, but it's really about the people who are going to be using it, and that's where the focus should be. It's really difficult to talk to funders about this.
I always love Northerners' responses to dreams because they're always around people and knowing people. So, Michael, did you want to add anything?
No, I think it's I think you're bang on.
All right, great. So we have another question. Unless anyone wants to talk more about their dream, we can go right into it. So another comment that we had in the chat, which was a really good point, was that we needed to offer real-time learning and a friendly approach. So a theme throughout all of your conversations intersecting with this is access and participation. And the question is, do you have anything further to add on the topic of access and participation?
I think I can ask, I'll start first, and I'm sure Holly and Todd have much more to add to it. I think on the topic of participation, is if people have access and we've met the communities where they are and their needs, the participation question becomes a lot easier because we're not trying to convince people to participate in something that they do not require and have not asked for. And so I think that's a reality we need to face when we're not seeing participation in these programs. We really need to ask ourselves, okay, why are we not seeing it? And quite often, if we're honest with ourselves, it's because we haven't really met the needs of the community that we're trying to deploy it in. I think the access piece is the other thing is as an example, if we're going to offer something for a school-aged individual to attend for development, perhaps the middle of the day during classes isn't the best time to run the program. And so access isn't just about like whether it's offered or whether or not they can physically get there, but sometimes it's just about us, how we choose to do things that kind of create barriers. And so I think all these things really need to be looked at carefully when we're talking about participation. I don't know, Holly and Todd, if you guys have any more thoughts on that.
I think trying to, I think always being community led, like trying to make sure whatever you're creating or whatever space you're trying to create actually has input and buy-in from community and is led by the community, like is represented in that community. Because if people don't see themselves represented there, or if it doesn't feel like it's coming from them, then they're probably not going to be participating or feel that participation. And just to, go back to the Digital Creator Project, a lot really came down to like who the mentor was in the space. That's usually like, the community that would show up was just so representative of like who was representing that space, and who felt safe there and who felt like that was for them. Yeah.
I feel like I'm just going to repeat maybe what's already been said by Michael and Holly, but asking the right questions is key. And I think sometimes I've been guilty of this in sort of, asking the wrong questions, so in a weird way, giving the wrong answers. And I think need to be really clear about what's being asked for before you start providing these kind of solutions. And when it comes to participation, I mean, I think all of our experience has been, it's just, you just need to spend so much time talking to people and making sure that needs are being met, that you're meeting people where they live, that you are, you know, you're responding to a genuine need if there is one. And the other thing I'd say here, just to borrow from one of Michael's points, is there's no harm in not wanting to participate either, right? I mean, I think we presuppose the stuff is magical and wonderful and great, which, you know, it is in a lot of ways, but no harm in not wanting to do this. But if you want it, if you want to be part of this, you absolutely should be able to do it. And I think there's a nuance there that we shouldn't ignore, which is perfectly fine if you don't want to do this. If you do, here's how we can make it happen.
Absolutely. And just another piece around participation is that it also needs to be participation that's culturally aware or aware of the community or of the language. And there are so many times people have come to my community organizations and have told me, this is what I need, this is how you participate. And that's really not the case because it doesn't even connect to my day-to-day life. Or there are cases where, yeah, it's just not really needed. And yeah, growing up in northern communities, everyone always tells you what you need, what you lack. But I could tell you if you took 2 seconds to listen to me. So that's one great thing about participation is having the agency to either say yes or no, and not focusing on numbers, because sometimes you only need one person to know how to work the radio. But Todd, is there anything you wanted to add?
Oh, that was beautiful.
Okay.
Really well said. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, great. So these are some of the questions that came out, and I just want to give a moment to any of the speakers if there's anything you wanted to add to those 2 questions about dreams or the access and participation team.
I think I'll add something really quick, and because we touched on it in the thought pieces, and we may or may not have touched on this, but I think the important piece about all of this is that in the light we're talking about kind of creativity and artists and kind of culture and that, and so we have to remember what we're trying to achieve and be honest with ourselves, and then work backwards to figure out what steps we need to take to actually get there. And they may not be easy, and agencies may not like the answer that they get, and as we've all talked about, funders may not like the responses that they're getting back. But if we're serious about cultivating this creative and cultural kind of industry and having benefit to our rural and remote communities to be able to access that and participate, then the spaces for those conversations are as important as everything else that we've talked about here today. And so my shout out for the work that we do is one of the key priorities, or one of the 3 pillars we have, is trying to create those spaces for those intentional actions and outcomes to get us to where we want to be. So yeah, I thank you all for this great experience. So.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to my last comment, just that I would love to, like, I feel like I'm going to leave this conversation. I'd love other folks to leave the conversation thinking about what happens after innovation. Because I think that the funders right now are like, digital is going to be the solution. It's the way. We're just going to fund all this digital innovation. But then there's like no thought at all about like, how do you sustain something that is working and is magical and, you know, is something that community needs. There's no conversation about after the innovation, and I think we need to think about that, or maybe challenge the funders a little bit on, you know, okay, now what do we do?
All right, thank you all so much. And before we end things off today, I'd like to thank you all for attending. And if you haven't already, please visit Mass Culture's website and review Michael, Holly, and Todd's thought pieces, which are very much thought-provoking, and continue to reach out to Mass Culture or us with your own thoughts and curiosities on this subject matter, as we at Mass Culture view research and knowledge creations as a living and growing thing. Definitely what happens after innovation too.